Welcome to a special episode of Tales from the Green Benches, an oral history of Parliament. I'm Dr Peplow, and on the 4th of June 2025, my co-host, Dr Alex Locke, and I headed down to the Palace of Westminster to record a live episode of our series. We were in the very lovely Attlee suite, Portcullis House, and were joined by 3 special guests, including 2 former MPs that we've interviewed for the project, and, as well, a live audience. Over the evening, we discussed the history of Parliament's oral history project in more detail, including reflecting on what it feels like to be interviewed, and highlighting some of the new interviews we've carried out since recording the original series. Our project's ongoing, and we've added a lot more to our archive this year. What you're about to hear is a direct recording from this event, so there'll be a few ambient sounds in the background, including the famous Parliament division bell, ringing to indicate that a vote's taking place. We hope you enjoy listening to this episode and the live reflections from our guests. And if you like it, let us know by reviewing and sharing the series wherever you can. So, without further ado, here is our live episode from the Houses of Parliament.
Welcome to this recording of Tales from the Green Benches. So today we're delighted to be in the Attlee suite, Palace of Westminster, to record this bonus episode in front of a live audience.
And I'm really delighted I can see at least one of our interviewers, Tom, give a wave. We've got some of our volunteer interviewers in the room, and we have also 3 very special guests with us on the panel.
So first up, we've got Dr Priscila Pivatto to my right. And if you've listened to the podcast, you'll have heard a lot about Priscila. Priscila is an honorary fellow at the History of Parliament Trust and has a PhD in legal history. And from 2011 to 2018, she ran our oral history project, and she knows the archive better than anybody else. Priscila co-wrote the podcast with us and co-authored with Emma the book based on the archive, Political Lives of Post-War British MPs. And we've finally been able to talk to her in person and track her down for the podcast, which is a real triumph. So welcome, Priscila.
Thanks, Alex. Well, hello, everybody. It's a pleasure for me to be here and to finally join you. But I do have to say it's more comfortable to stay behind the scenes. But thanks very much.
Yes, we're delighted you finally talked her into this. And we're really, really thrilled. We've got 2 of our recent interviewees for the project who are able to join us tonight and talk about it. So I'm firstly going to introduce, at the far end, Baroness Stuart of Edgbaston, or Gisela Stuart, who was a former MP for Birmingham Edgbaston. Gisela was a Labour MP who now sits in the Lords as a crossbencher. And she was a health minister under Tony Blair. Now, Gisela's interview, I've been listening back to it again, is a really fascinating interview. It's reflecting on a journey from Bavaria to Birmingham, and via the book trade, law, pension reform, electoral reform. And there's a particularly good anecdote in there about a call from Alistair Campbell on the 1997 election night, which we cannot play because there's far too much choice language in it, I'm afraid. But yes, her interview was last year with Richard Purnell, and it's just over 11 hours in length. So welcome, Gisela.
And finally, we're joined by Anne Milton, former Conservative MP for Guildford between 2005 and 2019. She's also a minister under Theresa May, Deputy Chief Whip under Cameron and May. And Anne was a nurse for 25 years before deciding that she wanted to become an MP, and only then joining the Conservative Party. So, meteoric rise. So this is another great interview, particularly on the Conservative Party selection circuit in the 2000s, and for all her discussion on the Whip's office and how that's changed in recent years. So Anne's interview with us with Emmy Ledgerwood in 2024, and it's 8 hours long.
So so welcome everybody, and thank you everyone for coming. We're hoping to get into this a bit later, but both of our guests here tonight are really interesting perspectives on the Brexit referendum and the aftermath of all that. So that's something that we're really hoping to get into from very different sides. And seeing, especially as both of you sort of parted with your parties since then. So it'll be an interesting thing to explore, and there's a lot in the interviews about it. So if we could ask everybody please to formally, properly welcome everybody for Tales to the Green Benches. I'm going to first ask Alex and Priscila, what's the most surprising thing you think you've heard in one of our interviews? Either one that you've done yourselves, because both of you have interviewed for the project, or one that you've been listening to?
It's hard to choose one, but I think one of the things that surprised me, it was how differently men and women tell their stories during the interview. So most of the female MPs that we interviewed, they tend to remember their lives, combining their private lives and public life. Everything comes together, everything is mixed. And on the other hand, most of the men, they tend to keep those two words apart. So they can go for hours and hours talking about politics without mentioning anything about their families or, I don't know, friends or their jobs, to the point that sometimes we need to stop them and, okay, but let's talk about something else. So I was not expecting that. I have to say that in the more recent interviews, this line is not so clear, so we can see some things changing. But that was one thing. And also, all the stories about the daily life in Parliament, they are so fascinating and sometimes a bit surreal as well. So there is one that I really love from Elizabeth Peacock's interview. She was a Conservative MP. She was in the House during the 80s and 90s. And she told us that she really, really wanted to have a 10-minute row bill. She tried sometimes, she couldn't get it. And to get those sort of bills, the MPs needed to stay in line for a long time. They needed to queue. And she told us she didn't want to stay the whole night with her colleagues because she said they've been drinking in the bars, smoking. She was not willing to spend the whole night waiting for a place. And so she bought a big teddy bear, put a name tag on the teddy bear saying, Elizabeth Peacock's research assistant. She left the bear in the chair and left. And then when she came back early morning next day, people were saying like, oh, you were not here, you don't have the right. And she was not, no, my assistant was here keeping the place for me, so I'm doing this bill, and she got the bill. So the first time I heard that, I was like, what? What's this? And that was one of the first interviews we made, so I was a bit shocked. But I guess it tells us a lot about the daily life in Parliament, how the atmosphere, in this case also how the first female MPs felt being here. So it's interesting, but I guess after I don't know, 250 interviews, we are more used to those stories.
Yeah,
but,
definitely. Yeah. And Alex, what about you?
From my point of view, there are two things really strike me when I do the interviews, particularly with people who are in Parliament in the earlier years. Is that first there's no induction for new MPs. So they sort of arrive, and there wasn't, and so they arrive and just left to get on with it. That's what really shocked me with some of the earlier ones. And also the unusual work practices more generally, particularly in the earlier years, particularly sort of the lack of office space. So I remember interviewing James Ramsden, who was the last Secretary of State for War. He was describing how on his first time in Parliament, sitting in the corridors, receiving mail in the corridors, having to use a shared phone, a communal phone. And I thought that was very unusual, very unexpected. And of course, we're now meeting here in Portcullis House, so things have changed, and office space has been made available for MPs, but that wasn't always the case, and that was very surprising.
Yeah, no, it does seem to. I always reflect on just how long things change in Parliament. It takes things to change in Parliament. So I'd like to bring in Gisela and Anna. From your point of view as interviewees, was it a surprising or an unusual experience to have this sort of long form interview? Was there anything about it that was different than you expected?
Well, I think it was kind of free therapy because it's. I mean, the interviews were absolutely brilliant, and you're not told you've got to pack all this into half an hour, or it's just sort of, why don't you just kick off and see how long it takes, and whatever emphasis you want to put on. And it sort of holds a mirror up to yourself, but it's a mirror of your own choosing. So it's in your hands how you define yourself. And I sort of made a note afterwards. I think it was Kierkegaard who said, life is lived forward but understood backward. And I thought it's sort of a good moment to try and understand the life you've lived forward.
That's an absolutely perfect answer, Gisela. Thank you for that one. And Anne, what about you? What did you find anything surprising?
It didn't surprise me. And I agreed to it because I think it's really important. You become an MP because you want to make a difference. So I know MPs are derided and, we think they're awful. But most people come here because they want to make a difference. So you come here, but everybody will forget about it unless you leave a footprint behind. And I suppose doing the oral history is a way of leaving a footprint behind, really. And I mean, Giz is right, it was free therapy, no doubt about it. I don't think I needed therapy, but you go on this journey and you're busy and you do all the things you do, and you never stop and reflect because you need somebody to ask you the questions to do that. Mm-hmm. So yes, it was fascinating.
Brilliant. It's brilliant that you enjoyed it. Yeah.
I'm glad we could be of service. So the intention was always for our interviews to be different to the interviews that MPs perhaps were used to in their careers. So we always try to build trust, and we always try to explore ideas that are not necessarily captured in other avenues, so in the political interview or in the memoir. We talked a little bit about this in our bonus episode about the strategies behind it. But I wonder, Priscilla, if you could share any more information as to why did the History of Parliament Trust set up this project, and what were we trying to do differently?
Well, we wanted to, as the rest of the History of Parliament Trust does, tell the history of Parliament, the history of the institution, through the history of people, through the lives of people that make it. And unlike our colleagues, some of them are here that are studying, I don't know, MPs that were sitting in the House in the 15th century. The people we are studying are still alive. So we thought, come on, this is a good opportunity for us to record their voices, to hear those testimonials. We cannot miss this chance of having new primary sources and to create a whole new archive that people can do research years in the future. So that was our intention. It was not to miss this opportunity. Then we had discussions with the British Library, and I have to say they've been a big partner, always supporting us with methodological and ethical issues, and especially archiving our interviews. So discussing with them, we came together to the conclusion that oral history and life stories would be the methodology for us to do this, to create this new archive. Although we are not the typical oral history project, because of course we are interviewing former members of the parliament, so they are not a marginal group, they are not underrepresented in the historical record, they are very comfortable doing interviews, they are used to that, to tell their stories, but still we thought we could do something different and we could get new material and new perspectives on parliament and what it meant to be a politician. So that was the main reason we started the project. And the idea is not to just replicate things that we already know. So we are not asking about, I don't know how many votes you had in this election. We are asking about their feelings. We are asking them, as you just heard, to reflect back and make sense of the past. And this is why it's different from memoirs, because we do have many of our interviewees that had published memoirs. But it's a different process because our interviews, they are a dialogue, a living conversation between two people. So you can challenge them, you can, I don't know, maybe ask something they're not expecting or make a comment, giving a response. So this relationship is very crucial for us. And the result of the narrative it comes from this exchange between those two people. So it's not a memoir, but also it is not a journalistic interview. They take their time. We are not trying to get them to, I don't know, have some very nasty quotation or a breaking news headline. It's nothing like that. We are there to create a space, something that they can really reflect back with honesty on their lives, on their trajectory. So although the journalist's responsibility is with the audience, our main commitment is with the interviewee. So we are there to listen to their stories. So that was what we've been trying to do, to make them give us a bit of more about the feelings of being in this institution and what it meant to be a politician and an MP, and how that had also reflections on their lives.
Yes, it sounds like that is come across well. We've been judging what Gisela and Anne have already said, and we're hoping to play some clips later on that from other recent interviews that help to sort of explain that and explore that a bit. And again, Anne and Gisela, Anne, you talked about this a bit in your first answer about we want to ask why you wanted to take part in the project. You said you wanted to leave something behind. Was that the sole motivation for taking part in the project?
Yeah, I think so. I didn't feel a need to do it personally. Mm-hmm. I thought that partly because I was a bit of an accidental politician. You know, I've not been a member of debatees. I hadn't gone to Oxford. I hadn't even been to university. I trained as a nurse and worked in the NHS for 25 years. And I knew I was quite unusual, particularly as a Conservative MP. And so so a bit of me wanted to get my story out there, I think. But it was about leaving something behind. In 100 years from now, somebody might listen to this stuff and it will explain how it was. And oral history is so terribly important because you capture more than the written word ever can.
Yeah, definitely. And you, Gisela, what was your motivation for taking part?
I mean, there were two. One is we still have got, when it comes to history, women's voices underrepresented. And even now you can see in contemporary history, the speed with which memoirs and autobiographies are being produced is becoming quite spectacularly fast. But if you then you compare men and women, even when you've sort of got now equal numbers almost. But there was another aspect to it, and it takes me back to, I don't know whether any of you remembered, I was jokingly say I was the original Blair babe. I was the first Labour gain in 1997, elected on an all-women shortlist. And there was this photograph of 101 Labour women with Tony Blair. And to me, that photo was always really important because there was Claire Ward, who was then 28, and there was Anne Cryer, who'd had the seat of her husband who died in a car crash. And now, John Cryer's in the Lords and, a kind of thing. But any woman who wanted to go into politics could have looked at that photograph and said, she's a bit like me, and if she made it, then so can I. And I think he was just showing the normality of the people who end up in politics. And I thought oral history tells that much better, and say, if you're interested, have a go.
It's really interesting, the reaction to the Blair's Babes photograph across the archive. That's one of the great things we get, is all these different perspectives and different views on it, and some people hate it and some people love it, like you say. Yeah.
And if I may, exactly that was my motivation. Not many people who trained as a nurse, worked in the NHS for 25 years, become MPs. And I had no contacts. I knew absolutely nothing about politics or parliament or anything. So for the same reason, if I could do it, then you could do it.
Yeah. And then just to sort of add, and this is a real gender thing. The number of men I know who would tell me, well, I thought about becoming an MP, but then I decided it really didn't fit on my career. And I kept saying, you have no idea of the amount of serendipity that is involved in being selected as a candidate. It works in the weirdest ways, people who you think surely they must, and they never make it. And then, but I mean, I was in many ways an accidental politician, and suddenly you're there at the right time, at the right place, and it works for you.
No, that's precisely what we're trying to do with the archive: capture voices, capture stories that are not always heard, they're not always in the public domain. And because we're trying to collect long interviews over many sessions, as Priscilla says, we're always trying to build trust with the interviewee. All the interviewers are given extensive training provided by the British Library. And we're hoping to create a space where the interviewees feel safe enough to reveal material that they wouldn't necessarily reveal to a journalist or in other spheres. And of course, often these stories are something that they might feel that they want to share, that's important for the historical record, but that at the time when they were MPs, it wasn't something that they could say publicly. So, for instance, they might not be able to say it moments when they didn't agree with the party line, for example.
Yes, and we're going to play our first clip now from the archive, and it's a really good example, and it's from an interview that's currently ongoing, so it's very, very new. And it's with Jim Murphy, who was the Labour MP for East Renfrewshire between 1997 and 2015, and he was Secretary of State for Scotland. And I should say, because he mentions on the clip you're about to hear that he's never told this story before, we did check. He is happy for us to play this here. We're not trying to catch him out in a Today-style interview. But he's describing an incident that he hasn't discussed publicly, and it's when he was a whip and he was behind the scenes counting the votes and something goes a bit wrong.
Never saw the point of falling out with people just because they were in a different political party. It actually saved me once, and I haven't talked about this, but I will talk about it at some point. A man by the name of Geoffrey Clifton Brown, he was an opposition whip. Whips count the votes in the chamber. So when MPs go to vote, they go through the division lobby, and at the division lobby there's a civil servant, a clerk, who marks off whether you've voted or not. And then to get an immediate result, the whips then count people through the division lobby door. And for some reason, one warm afternoon, I lost my concentration. And when we got to the end, the number was over 100 less than it should have been. I looked at Geoffrey, and Geoffrey looked at me and said, there's no more people to come. Because when I had got to a number that would have meant the government would have lost the vote, Geoffrey didn't have an alternative number. And rather than saying, look, that's the number you've got, that's the number we're announcing, he said, that's not right, is it? I said, no. And he said, let's go in and count the numbers on the sheets. And seamlessly, we just went in probably 2 minutes later than normal and announced a number. If I hadn't had reasonable relationships with people and didn't have a reputation for being pretty reasonable and accommodating, Geoffrey could pretty easily have said, well, that's your number, and that's the number you're announcing. And I think I would have had to have resigned as a whip.
So that's a lovely clip, isn't it? I think it shows us that, and this is something that comes across the archive, it shows us that MPs are normal people. They're they're human beings. They can make mistakes, and the whip admitting a big mistake like that is also something that perhaps we wouldn't necessarily associate with whips or have in the mind of how we might imagine whips to be. And I think it also highlights something that's very strong across the archive, is that sort of collaborative nature and the collaborative working relationships, both across the lobby and with members of staff within Parliament, which is coming across very strongly. It's not all oppositional and antagonistic. It's very collaborative.
Go on.
I am going to come in because actually the point about collaborating across political parties is valid, but there is something very specific about the whips offices. So the opposition and the government whips offices, were you ever a whip?
No.
Right. So they work very closely together. So actually there is a camaraderie because you're both in the whips offices. So your job is to make it work, give the opposition time to oppose, and the opposition know that the government wants to win. So actually the collaboration is very, very strong. There is, as I say, camaraderie. But there is across the House.
You'd have been quite cross with him, though, as a deputy chief whip, wouldn't you, if he'd announced the votes that were 100 less than they should have been, and it wouldn't have necessarily gone down very well.
I wouldn't have got cross because nobody died.
Yeah, fair enough.
Except that don't always say the only thing you need to be able to do as a whip is count.
It just failed. I might have made them both do a maths GCSE paper or something. But yeah, I used to say it in the Whip's office. The trouble is, it's very insular, and if when we were in government, when the Conservatives were in government, we had a 70-vote majority, and there were some quite close votes. And people used to get really worried. And I used to say, look, nobody's dead. Nobody's died. Push it in some perspective. There's a tendency for it to be all very insular. You feel that the world is going to fall. No, it's not. Really, it's not.
But can I just say about friendships? I think it was Harry Truman who said, if you want a friend in politics, get a dog. And this assumption that true friendships actually tend to be with people on the other side. Because on your own side, ultimately, you're always ever so slightly competing with each other. It's you both want the same jobs. There's a tension in the relationships, whereas with opposition, it's kind of, it's really, you choose to be friends with them.
Yes.
And that's very, very counterintuitive.
I think that comes across a lot in the archive. There's lots of stories like that. Going back to Jim Murphy, Priscilla, what did you think about the clip?
I think it's really interesting because it gives us this feeling of the behind the scenes in Parliament, and we have so many examples of this in the archive. But another thing that I really enjoy in this clip is because, as I was mentioning before, the interview is a conversation in the present about the past. And this is interesting to see how he also wants to be remembered, how he portrays himself as this reasonable person, as this person that can work cross-party. So I think for us, in oral history, those insights are really interesting to think about how they are now portraying themselves. So
yeah. Yeah, that definitely comes across in that one, I think. Is there anything that you two feel, if you're willing to talk about it, that you were happy to talk about for us that you perhaps wouldn't have said at the time, or you wouldn't have wanted to come out in the public eye?
I mean, I didn't know the boundaries of the constituency to which I had been selected. I went to the selection meeting, and the Labour Party press officer, a guy called Ian Austin, who is now in the Lords, is Lord Austin, came up and he said, and I said, Ian, have you got a map of the constituency? Because what happened is that I wanted Stourbridge because that's where I had a collection, all kinds of things. And then all these seats were coming up and Edgbaston came up. And I thought, I'm going to go and try Edgbaston just as a trial run. I had not intended to win that selection meeting. So I was driving up the motorway, took the wrong exit. I had misread the piece of paper. I thought it was at 2:30, actually it was at 2 o'clock. There was that kind of rule where if you turned up late, you weren't there. So I sort of arrived within 2 minutes to spare. And I thought, I can either now go in there and say, look, I took the wrong exit by the motorway, I didn't read the letter out, but by the way, I want to be your MP. And I didn't think that was a terribly good way of starting the relationship. So I just went in and went, I hadn't intended to cut this quite as fine as this. And I got selected. And that comes into the serendipity of politics. Mm-hmm. And with hindsight, actually, the constituency and I were the perfect match. Stourbridge would have been completely wrong. And you just never know what's going to happen.
No, and that's quite interesting. I can remember Jackie Lay, who was very sweet to me when I was wanting to find a seat. And at the time, the Conservative Party knew it needed more women. It sort of thought to itself, we need more women. And because I wasn't very strident, I think I did better. Maybe because they thought I'd be more malleable. But Jackie Lay said to me, when you find the right constituency, you will find your fit. And indeed I did. I went to lots of interviews and I had to buy the Daily Telegraph. I'm not very party political, I should say that. So, I was never a dyed-in-the-wool Conservative Party member. I wanted to be an MP and then I thought, which political party should I join? Unfortunately for the Labour Party, I spent most of my working life in Hackney when the Labour Party were a bit...
Not that and you toyed with the Liberals.
I never toyed.
No, that's the unforgivable sin.
I never toyed with the Liberals, no. So anyway, I joined the Conservative Party, but we bought the Telegraph because I needed to make sure I knew what Conservative-minded people were thinking. And before I used to go in for an interview, my husband used to say, don't forget to hang 'em, shoot 'em and flog 'em. In case I went off message.
So a lot of what we're trying to do in the interviews is to encourage our interviewees to reflect back for the historical record, and ideally after their political career or at the end of their working lives. So our next clip demonstrates how MPs, when reflecting back, can change their minds on how they behaved or what the best course of action was at the time. So this clip is from our interview with Ming Campbell, now Lord Campbell of Pittenweem, who was Liberal Democrat MP for North East Fife between 1987 and 2015, and of course Liberal Democrat leader in 2006 to 2007, taking over from Charles Kennedy. In this clip, he's reflecting on the events around becoming leader and how he may have done things differently.
And I did something which I later regretted. I said I was going to stand. Quite rightly, people thought that was a bit too quick. But there was a view, and I was pressed to this by some people whose advice I took but I should have rejected, that there's got to be some kind of continuity here. And it would have been better, on reflection, to have waited and said, well, I'm the deputy leader. I'll be taking over from Charles's responsibilities. I haven't made my mind up, or something. It looked as, what sort of stamping on people when they're down. I mean, it's not the thing. I can't remember how I was encouraged into it.
I think this is a really good clip. I'm getting quite a lot of material in the archive at the moment around the sort of end of Charles Kennedy's leadership of the Lib Dems and all of the difficulties in the party that there were around that. I think it's not surprising that they now look back on that period and see it in a slightly different light. It must have been incredibly stressful and difficult on a sort of personal and a political level to try and manage that situation with Charles Kennedy's drinking and trying to keep that out of the press and also manage what to do with the party. And, they're all very, very fond of Charles Kennedy. That comes across really well in the interview. So I don't think it's that surprising at all that Lord Campbell thinks that he sort of could have handled it a bit differently.
I think also because it's such a well-known event, but at the same time with those interviews, we can get a different perspective, a different view on that. And it is interesting just to hear his voice and see how he's telling this story. It just adds layers and layers and texture in the historical narrative. So this is why we're doing this. And I think I mentioned before, like, we are not trying to find a window to the past. This is how they see those experiences now. So it is about this process of remembering that we are working here with.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So I'd like to ask our guests, did you find the interview an opportunity to reflect back on your career? And was there anything that you saw differently in hindsight? Begin with you, Anne.
No. We're coming on to talk about Brexit, aren't we?
Yes.
Yes, we are. Yes.
No, not at all. I've got 4 children, you know. I suppose my guiding light in my life is my 4 children. And I always was aware of the fact that how I behaved, what I did, what I said, I had to feel comfortable with it. Because as I can remember saying to one Secretary of State, he was going through a very difficult time and wondering how to play an issue, you know, that he wasn't terribly sure what to do. And I said to him, the only person you ever have to face is yourself in the mirror every morning when you brush your teeth. And I felt the same about my children. So no, I don't view it differently. I view it in a similar light.
It's kind of a weird question in the sense, on the one hand, you could, if I look at my life, including what I'm doing now, I've been lucky enough that there have been a whole string of people suggesting that I do things which I was going, but that wasn't my idea. But if you think I can do it, I'll give it a go. And if I fail, don't blame me, because, you know, it was your idea in the first place. And I've been exceptionally lucky, and you could sort of think that it's sort of Panglossian. And even now I reflect, you know, I was made a health minister at the time, and I really shouldn't have been made a health minister. I mean, I barely found where number 10 was, you know, never mind how the health service worked. And just as I probably didn't deserve to be promoted, at the time when I actually got sacked, I wasn't the right thing either. It was one of those musical chairs, you know, and the music stopped playing and that was it. With hindsight, it was the best thing that happened to me, because it meant I didn't. What didn't happen to me is that I came in with the Blair Tide in '97 and went out with it. I managed to establish a reputation of things. But I want to follow on something about what Anne just said, and I think it's about family, and you reflect on that. I also reflect that the wisest decision I made in '97 was that there isn't a single photograph in the public domain with my children on it. There was no photograph of my first husband. There was no photograph with me and with my second husband until the one I released when he died. And when in 2015, when I knew that this was the last election I would fight, I suddenly thought, well, I'm going to take my children to the count, because I did want them to have that experience of being in the count. And other than my office manager and my campaign manager, nobody else knew what my children looked like. And that was so important, because it meant that there could be teenagers, they could be just doing stupid things. They then got to the point where when they would tell their girlfriends that their mum is an MP, but it was their choice. And I think that's because that's the only thing that matters at the end of the day, I think.
It's completely nothing to do with anything. But you talk about your children going to the count. I think it's really important. I think everybody should go to a general election count, because it is democracy. The votes are counted in front of you. You know, people that sit at a table like this counting the votes, and you have people watching, observers watching the votes. That is democracy. There's something quite moving about it. So if you've never been to a general election count, contact your MP and say that you want to go to the general election count when there is a general election.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very, very exciting events, aren't they? Very, very exciting. It's interesting you both mentioned children as well in this. Is a lot of the interviewees do mention about, you know, the hours working at Parliament and missing, you know, their children growing up, and that is a form of regret often.
But I found a way of getting out of this, and this is when you've got grandchildren, you then implant the false memory in your own children by becoming the perfect grandmother. And then they go thinking, surely she must have been baking cakes and reading good night stories.
And don't go too far. MPs, you know, MPs get recesses which coincide with school holidays. There are not many jobs that you can earn the figure that MPs earn. I won't be popular for saying this, but earn the figure that they earn and have that much flexibility. When Parliament's sitting, it's less flexible, although if you're a Conservative MP, they're never going to, the Conservative Party isn't going to win any votes, so unlikely to defeat the government. Well, you never know, do you? but you know, you've got quite a bit of flexibility with children. And you give them something else. You say to children, actually, you can go and do this.
Mm-hmm. So we want to finish up today's event by showcasing our new research. So what we've been doing since we've recorded the podcast was share some of the recordings from the new interviews, the new intake of interviews that we've had. So a lot of the podcast was based on interviews with people who left Parliament before 2010, and there's lots that has changed between now and then.
That's a bit of an understatement, isn't it? So we're getting quite a lot of new material of reflections on things like the 2010 to 15 coalition government and sort of austerity policies. We're getting lots of really good interviews with former Lib Dem MPs who never expected to be in government and the sort of shock of finding themselves in coalition with the Conservatives. We're getting a lot of reflections on things like Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party, although I've got to say we've got more negative views at the moment on that experience than we have positive views, but maybe that will change as the archive keeps growing. And we have a lot as well. I see your face, Gisela.
Good luck with that one.
Well, you don't know, these lots of people who lost their seat in 2019, I'm afraid they probably don't have the best remembrance of Jeremy Corbyn. Anyway, and the impact of the Scottish referendum is another thing that's really coming across really strongly. So we're getting, again, a sort of Labour MPs who lost in 2015 who perhaps didn't expect to. So people like Jim Murphy, who we're talking to now, Baroness Curran. And then we're getting more and more SNP voices in our archive, which is brilliant for us. So we've got a whole new cohort of people who've just left who we're bringing on to bring in. So there's a whole new range of contemporary history really to discover.
But the major event that we're now collecting a lot of material on is Brexit, of course. And I was even interviewing MPs whilst the Brexit referendum was taking place. I was interviewing Jonathan Aitken, who, predicted the outcome. So we have, interviews taking place whilst the referendum was there, and then also interviews reflecting back over the years subsequently. So two of the interviewees who spoke most about this are sitting with us here today, so we get to hear from them in person in a moment. But first we'll play an archive clip from another MP before asking our panel to share their memories. So this next clip is from the Labour MP Susan Ellen Jones, who represented Clwyd South between 2010 and 2019. So in this clip, she's discussing Marching for the People's Vote campaign, which our audience may remember was a movement asking for a second referendum.
I marched. They did very well. They did very well in terms of they kept the Labour MPs. There were lots and lots of people on the streets. They kept us very well away from Change UK. They did well. Near us also was standing Dominic Grieve, which was quite amusing. The very Tory Dominic Grieve, who was saying, "I'd never been on a demonstration before. This is very interesting." But I tell you what I did get a sense of then, apart from how horrific it all was. And, politically, I'd probably be in a very different camp from someone like Dominic Grieve, who was very much an old-fashioned high Tory. You could see the tensions that you see now in the Tory party already starting to show. And it dawned on me that what they wanted were fundamentally different things. It was a depressing time for the Labour Party, but I think you could sort of see a bit the tensions that may happen in the Tories.
We wanted to share that clip sort of partly because it brought back the sort of People's Vote campaign, which I think may well get lost a little bit in the annals of history because it didn't get the second referendum that it wanted to. So that's something that we're able to record. But also it really shows how Brexit completely cut across party lines in a way that perhaps the future historians will not properly understand. And it's a really sort of very obvious thing that comes across in our archive. And I don't need to say that to either of the two people sitting here who both perhaps had slightly different views than maybe certainly their party leadership, and well, maybe not. Yes, different views from different people in their party. Gisela, of course, was the chair of the Vote Leave campaign, and you lost the Conservative whip over one of the Brexit votes.
Yes, but the extraordinary thing is that I didn't feel that strongly. So I'd been a health minister, so I could quite see why people had a problem with Europe. You know, I wanted to tax high-strength alcohol and couldn't because of EU rule. I mean, health was absolutely dominated by EU regulation. So I didn't actually feel that strongly about Brexit. I did vote Remain, but I wasn't particularly unhappy with the results. I lost the Conservative whip because I felt that we should leave with a deal. So it was on that fine point. But I had resigned as an education minister the day that Boris Johnson became leader of the Conservative Party, because I didn't think he was fit to lead a party.
When you look back on that period, because it was such an important time, I think, for both of your political careers, would you have done anything differently, do you think, now when you look back on it?
Yes and no. So in terms of the no, to me, if Nigel Farage had been designated as the official Leave campaign, that's when I would have fallen silent. I always said I was a constitutional Brexiteer in the sense, and therefore, if Vote Leave does it, yes, we go on that. But the thing where I think we made a fundamental error, and it's still playing itself out, is that I'd said to Michael Gove and to Boris Johnson very clear, I go up to Manchester and I take the result, and you two stay in London because I don't want the Brexit result to be seen in terms of Tory leadership campaigns. Great. So worked that differently. But I still said to them after the referendum, you're on this side and I'm on this side, end of story. And it's then the government's job to implement. And it took us too long to realise that because even to this day, I don't think they really understood why people voted Leave. And therefore, Brexit wasn't implemented because there was a failure to truly understand what it was about. And it wasn't until the autumn that we sort of, in a group of others, set up the success organisation, Change Britain, to sort of say, these are the kind of things you could do, these are the kind of models. And that is still playing itself out. And so if you were to say, what would I have done differently? I wouldn't have said, and I'll walk away. I would have said, we need to have a cross-party vehicle immediately that works on, that helps the government on what it would mean to implement.
I mean, it's 9 years ago, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, it's 9 years ago. And, I mean, the interview that you played, the tensions in the Conservative Party have been there forever. I mean, talk to Bill Cash. Who will tell you who's been...
We're about to talk to Bill Cash, actually.
And it will be very, long interview probably. Because he has
we're preparing
very
for that.
strongly about this for a very long time. So the tensions were there. I think the sadness to me about Brexit is I think that is a moment that political dialogue changed. I think it harshens the way people speak about things. There was a feeling that, my difficulty was I didn't have a strong view. And I can remember standing on somebody's doorstep and he said, I can't remember whether he was for remaining or leaving. But I said, well, I'm quite sort of easy about this. And he said, you got absolutely furious with me. And he said, well, you must have a view. I veered on the side of Remain, but, if the country voted to leave, so be it. It's a shame it destroyed the premiership of Theresa May, who is in every way a good woman, maybe not fit to lead the Conservative Party. But the Conservative Party did, and it has done it forever, it saved the party rather than the country, if I'm honest. That's why Cameron had that referendum, because he couldn't keep the people within the Conservative Party quiet.
And just as I said during the referendum, and at that stage I was sort of slightly smiled at, and said, what you've got to remember is that Nigel Farage does not want to win this referendum. He wants to lose it by 0.5% so that he can have a continuous grievance. And what he really wants, and what at the core of much of this was about who speaks for England. And he wanted to do to the Tories in England what the SNP had done to Labour in Scotland. And, 9 years on, he's getting pretty close there. But just as a little aside, I still get hate mail.
Still?
But my hate mail all comes from Germany.
Oh.
So the one group of people who still have not forgiven me, and the best way was explained to me, sort of said, for the French, the Brits just got divorced. We sort out who pays the bills, who gets the children, who looks after the dog, end of story. For the Germans, the girlfriends just ditched you.
Yeah.
And Angela Merkel in her autobiography which is 692 pages if you've got the time for it.
I have read it.
But the one moment where she actually is very emotional is about Cameron and how we were left standing by the Brits.
I know. It is a long book, but it's
Badly
worth
translated.
Yeah, possibly, I wouldn't say. But it's worth a read. Because I think it's quite interesting, really, from that point of view. And the Conservative Party is still dogged. I think you're right. I think that there is still a lack of understanding why people voted to leave. And people are still a bit snooty about people who voted to leave. And this is going to carry on for another 10 years. Because Nigel Farage is now in a much more prominent position, and he can just turn around to both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party in turn and say, well, you never implemented it, but he might have a point.
And we'll be there to record it all. Listen in.
He'd probably do you an interview before you start.
We'll have to wait. We'll have to wait for his career to end, I suppose. But we're acquiring a lot of new material. We're acquiring a lot of new insights, particularly into the changing culture around Parliament, which again is something that Anne and Gisela talked a lot about in their interviews. We're finding sort of significant changes to people's lifestyles with the change of hours that Parliament was sitting. We're finding a lot of differences about the makeup of Parliament to include many more women, particularly following all women shortlists. And we're finding changes in sort of the culture around that, so perhaps a less masculine culture, a culture with less drinking, but also people mourning the loss of sort of the camaraderie that came with the late nights and the sociability of Parliament. There's also, we're discovering lots of changes within the Whip's office, which seems to be taking a different approach, and Anne, of course, spoke a lot about this in her interview.
And we're just going to play our last clip, and I think we've got time. We're going to try. We've got time for it. Yeah, that this had, I think, on an issue that has a huge impact on our politics and Parliament, which is social media and the impact of social media, which is really starting to come through. Sadly, a lot of this is a quite negative view from politicians we speak to. For example, we've got several MPs now who say that they wouldn't get involved in politics now because of social media, or they wouldn't advise their family to get involved because of this pressure. So our final clip is from Alison Rainsford, who I think was an MP as Alison Seabeck, who was MP for Plymouth, Devonport or Moorview between 2005 and 15. And in her clip, she's reflecting on the impact that social media had on her final election campaign. And she's particularly talking about the future of the Devonport dockyard, which was in her constituency, and how that was used in the campaign.
And my Conservative opponent had a very good PR team who were very smart at using social media. And what we hadn't realised, because we weren't in that bit of social media, was just how effective this was being. There was a line that was being fed, which was, if you vote Labour, all the nuclear submarines are going to Scotland. So you forget the dockyard, it's going to Scotland and the dockyard will close. And we had no idea this was going on. And it was being very, very effective. But it was only a week before the general election, and I got a message from my unions in the dockyard, and they said, we've got a problem, you need to come. So I went in and they said, well, we're picking up that everybody believes the dockyard's going to close because the nuclear... What? And so the week to go, that was quite tricky. So I managed to get the Shadow Secretary of State down for Defence, and he put the messaging out saying, no, this isn't the case, this isn't the case. But I'm fairly certain that was quite a key.
So this is a lovely clip, which I think shows the real growing impact of social media and how it can be, a very effective electioneering tool. And what we're tracing across this archive is how, there's a change now from mass rallies to, more important work on social media, social media campaigns that are replacing the rallies and coming in comparable importance for electioneering with television campaigns.
Yeah, and we also get a lot of people reflecting on the abuse about social media that people get. So Anne Begg, who's a really interesting reflection on it, where she compares the abuse she got on social media compared to the abuse she got in the chamber, where she said, although she felt like she should she should find the chamber more worse because you could see the people and you could see their body language. In some ways, the sort of anonymity of social media made it feel much more threatening and she found it much more difficult to cope with the sort of this vague threat coming at her and sort of thing. So, yes, I guess that's something that we will find out more about as we carry on interviewing. Yeah.
See how it develops over time. But I suppose that leads us to our final question for Anne and Gisela. Can you both reflect on what you think is the most important change that you've witnessed throughout your parliamentary career?
It's a big question for the last question. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah. How have you seen Parliament change?
I'll give a very sort of short answer in the sense that the biggest changes since 97 and then today has actually been devolution and, the consequence of us leaving the European Union and the big unresolved question of who speaks for England.
Yeah.
Now I've got a Scottish Parliament, you've got a Welsh Assembly or Parliament, the Senate, but the question of England's voice is still unresolved.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there are changes, as Gisela mentioned. Brexit is probably the most important decision in my lifetime, actually, which is why I regret nothing about that time at all. I think the lack of change is a shame. You talked about 10-minute rule bills sort of at the beginning. I mean, it still operates in this arcane way, really, that nobody understands. You've seen it with the assisted dying legislation. Actually, it's very good. How many people in the media truly understand the process of a private member's bills? I was in the whip, so I was Deputy Chief Whip, and you have to really get into the weeds of how a private member's bill works. So, and I think that's a shame. And in fact, the juxtaposition of it being such an important and ethical issue, and the fact that the private member's bill process is so bizarre, and I think that Parliament, if we want to continue to persuade people to vote, continue to go into the ballot box, not see turnouts fall, not see populist parties if we're trying to overcome all the social media misinformation that's out there, then we've got to make this place make some sense to the people that we're asking to vote for the people who go here.
This is something that comes across so much in our interviews about how long it takes anything to change. There's a brilliant anecdote from Lynn Featherstone where she says she once tried to get track changes to be put on a bill going forward and back within a committee, and she said she thought she could spend her entire time in Parliament fighting to get track changes included on this bill process, so she just wasn't going to bother doing it. And I guess most people must feel like that. So it's such a fight to get anything changed within parliamentary system in order to...
The problem is, even when you change... So the only way that kept me halfway sane is because problems come up and you go and say, 10-year NHS plan. I go and said to Alan Milburn, Alan, didn't we write one of those 20 years ago?
Oh, yes, I did.
And I think it's John Gray who sort of said, politics is about finding partial solutions to recurring problems. So every time I see something and think, didn't we solve that? I go, partial solution, recurring problem, calm down.
Gisela and I realised that we were the same age. I don't know how old she was, but we are at the same age. And I can remember a long, long time ago talking to a consultant who said that the time she knew it was time for her to retire. She knew she ought to retire when the NHS was reinventing something that had been there when she started her career as a doctor. And I feel the trouble is when you get a bit older, you think, surely not that again. Resource Allocation Working Party, which is in the 70s, which is about devolving, which is about government departments working outside of London. Yeah. And we're still talking about it. So nothing's ever new.
Thank you ever so much, everybody, for joining us today. I've had so much fun doing this, and I hope you've enjoyed it as well. And it's been great to be able to share some more insights from our project with you. I really want to thank all of our guests, Priscilla for generally being awesome at everything, and for us finally agreeing to get you on the podcast. Baroness Stuart and Anne Milton, thank you for being brilliant interviewees, for being fantastic tonight, and for all your support for the project. We really do appreciate it, and for letting us give you a bit more of a grilling tonight. We appreciate a little bit more for the interview. And don't forget, you can listen back to our first series of Tales from the Green Benches, wherever you get your podcasts, download, subscribe, do all those things that you're supposed to do to podcasts, please. And we're really hoping there are going to be some more soon. Hi, Emma here again. I hope you all enjoyed that. We certainly had a lot of fun recording it. Thank you again to our guests, Dr Priscila Pivatto, Anne Milton, and Gisela, Baroness Stuart, for taking part in this special episode. More information about their interviews and all of the clips we played in the episode can be found in our show notes. A big thank you to our audio producer Melissa for helping put this special episode together. And finally, thank you to our brilliant audience who attended the recording. We'll leave you with a few comments from those in the room to finish this episode. So make sure that you like, share and subscribe to our feed to be the first to hear about the new episodes and stay up to date with everything from the history of Parliament.
It was really, really interesting, really eye-opening. It was lovely to see ex-MPs directly in front of you talking so candidly about their experiences, and also understanding why oral history is just so pivotal to modern history going forward.
I thought it was incredibly insightful. The last 10 years, especially of politics, have been an absolute whirlwind, and in an age of social media, I think a very long-form interview is an art that you really can't afford to lose at the moment. I think of the students writing their dissertations in 50 years' time, writing about the Brexit referendum, writing about the Scottish independence referendum, or even selections for the 1997 election. I think this is going to be so important, so it's kind of interesting to watch that first draft of history get made with these interviews.
You studying history?
Yeah, MA.
And can I ask, are you aware of oral history and how it works and why it's important?
Yeah, we've both done oral history modules before and we both really enjoy it, and we think it's a really interesting methodology and being able to really connect a lot of marginalised histories as well in the present that are usually quite ignored. It was nice hearing other people's kind of approach to oral history as well, because I feel like oral history really does reflect each historian that does it, and each historian leaves a bit of themselves in an interview, and so I find that really interesting to hear people's process and how they approach it and what they think is really important about it.
I really liked hearing about things like kind of tensions within the parties, which you really don't get kind of looking in from the outside, and it was really nice to have kind of two very differing female perspectives at times.
The live podcast experience, it was the bells ringing in the background, it was all very atmospheric. Yeah, and it was also really interesting.
Really exciting to be actually in the audience listening to the live podcast this evening, and I think something that came up in the episode was how valuable kind of oral histories are, because they are so different to that written word.
So I've just done the training to be an oral history interviewer for this very project, so I am now filled with enthusiasm to go off and add to this very important archive, which is clearly going to be absolutely crucial to future historians. So having sort of done 2 days of training, it was all sounding a bit daunting, but having actually heard some of the clips and also the MPs reflecting on it, it's just so much fun, and it reminds me why I volunteered in the first place, which is have conversations with really interesting people and find out new stuff that no one has heard before.